Welcome back. As areas of New York continue to face flooding, the organization FloodNet aims to educate communities with information on street flooding and how it impacts neighborhoods that are vulnerable to high tides, storm surges, and storm water runoff. Community Engagement Manager for FloodNet NYC, Véronëque Ignace, joins me to discuss their efforts and what you can do to stay informed about flooding. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I just want to talk about your organization a little bit more. Can you just tell us more about FloodNet and the work that you do to inform people about flooding?
For sure. FloodNet is a partnership that really started in 2020 and is happening between academic researchers at the New York University, NYU, and the City University of New York, CUNY, as well as some government partners that we have, which are the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, the New York City Office of Technology and Innovation, including the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And really what this project is doing, our mission is to develop tools that can be used for real-time urban flood monitoring and implement those tools across New York City as well.
And can you just tell us a little bit more about like what some of those tools may look like or how, some of that may work?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really interesting to talk about tools because so much of what we're developing can be used not just here in New York City, but in other places across the country. But what we're really doing is kind of trying to build at scale a network of flood sensors that can collect data in real time about when flooding is happening, how severe that flooding is, and really update the city, partners, residents, and folks with information from those sensors onto a data dashboard that we have available on our website.
Now, can you talk about some neighborhoods in the Bronx that are a little bit more prone to flooding? And I also want to add that, like, as a Bronxite, sometimes I think for a lot of people in the Bronx, we don't necessarily think of like flooding like in the city. Like normally we'll think about it in maybe upstate New York, but could you just talk about how it may actually be affecting some areas in the Bronx?
Yeah, for sure. I think first I would say that really resonates with me. I'm a New York City native as well, and we don't often think about flooding as something impacting us. But I think what we can consider is that flooding in New York City is happening in a couple of ways, right? Either the water is coming from the sky, where we're having high intensity rain events that are impacting us and causing flooding to occur, but also there's also flooding that's coming from the coast. So all of the neighborhoods that are in the Bronx that are right along the coast are going to be impacted by flooding. And really it's up to what our city can do in terms of being able to drain out that water as it's happening, which is what we call like stormwater piping systems, whether we are in a position to actually drain out that water and ensure that folks are safe.
Now, speaking of safe, do you have any possibly like some safety tips that Bronx residents should know, or maybe just New Yorkers in general, as we mentioned that we don't necessarily think of ourselves as people affected by this? What are some things they should know just to be safe in regard to that?
I think as far as the work of FloodNet is concerned, what we're really hoping to do is that folks are able to know what their resources are and where they can find them, right? The more informed you are before a flood event happens, the safer that you'll be, right? Not just about your daily decision making, but other ways that you can kind of be a source of information within your community. So New York City stormwater flood maps are really important resource for people to know. The New York City Office of Emergency Management as well has a bunch of resources available in various languages that folks can become familiar with as well. And I think on our end with FloodNet, what we're hoping to do, especially through community engagement, is ensure that folks are able to read and interpret the data that we're collecting and use that to their advantage.
Now, you briefly mentioned the, collaboration with CUNY. Can you talk about this collab with CUNY and NYU to create flood sensors to help monitor flooding?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting conversation because our partners that make up FloodNet are they're vast and they're diverse, and I think each of the partners as well have built longstanding relationships within the communities they serve and on different types of projects related to this issue. So FloodNet really is just one project within a spectrum of other projects addressing flooding in the city. CUNY, on the CUNY side, we have the Science and Resilience Institute at Jamaica Bay, which is based out of Brooklyn College. And we have the Advanced Science Research Center, which is based in Harlem at the Graduate Center. Both of these partners were developing sensors. Then we have on the NYU side in there at the engineering school, what originally was the Flood Sense project that was also developing sensors. So I think the mayor's office, who knew about both of these endeavors happening, was able to communicate with them and suggest that they work together. And ultimately, that's what we're doing now.
Now, for those who are unaware, including myself, can you just explain what flood sensors are and how that actually works?
Yeah, it's definitely. So we are developing these flood sensor tools, and I think we're still kind of fine tuning what the manufacturing of those sensors are so that they can kind of live at scale across the city. But it is a small device that works with a little bit of a solar panel on it, and it gets installed onto a U-channel post, which, to be honest, before this project, I did not know what that word was. But it is the guardrail that holds the parking signs that we see on the streets, the ones that tell us which side of the street to be on. So we install a small device right onto that, and it works with an ultrasonic sensor. So it sends a pulse down to the ground and measures the distance back up to be able to let us know whether water is there and how much of it is there. The sensor does look like a camera, but it is not a camera. And so some of our community engagement efforts are really trying to ensure that the folks that see it know what it is before it gets installed and have a say in where it goes and where we can start to collect that data.
That's a really cool thing. I'm so glad that you were able to explain that, especially the part where you say, like, we want the community to know, because I think oftentimes people see things and they're like, they feel like unsure or, like just not aware of what's going on. So I think that's amazing that you let the community kind of be involved in what happens in that. Can you just explain, is this like the only area where they can be involved, or there's more ways that they can be involved in what goes on in the community?
No, I think there are so many other ways to be involved in this project. And one of the core principles of this project is that not just that we are offering open data, access to data, but also open access to the technology, right? And part of that also means being able to collect and incorporate feedback from key stakeholders that are interested in this project, and that includes residents as well. So outside of just suggesting where a sensor can go and kind of informing us where they may have be experiencing flooding on the ground, there are also opportunities to facilitate educational workshops with us where we can either lead those or be invited to other activities and programming that is happening across the city to kind of spread this information and also share what we know about how to build senders, about how the data dashboard works, and share resources that address flooding across the city.
Now, for our viewers watching, can you explain how to accurately read the data on flooding maps?
Well, I think flooding maps are just can be challenging for anyone, right, including myself. So as far as that goes, I think we are really interested in being a resource for folks to help teach how to interpret data and how to read those maps. And then I think it will also be really important to mention that the partners that make up FloodNet, especially those like the Community Flood Watch Project, which has been happening in Jamaica Bay, is another resource where our partners are actually doing the work in training folks about how to read these maps, how to know about forecasting, and how to also collect data, right? Taking photos of flooding, submitting it to tools that can be shared across the city.
Now, what are some common ways flooding can occur in the city, and are there different types of floods?
Yeah, I think I alluded to this as I mentioned before, right? We are seeing flooding that's happening from high rain events. We're also seeing flooding that's coming from the coast, right? Where there are coastal events in the sea, that the neighborhoods in the city that are living across the coast are being impacted by that water. But what can also happen too is what we call high tide flooding, right? Where the tides are actually rising and that water is coming inland as well.
Now, are there any specific flooding disasters that alter how the city handles a flood crisis?
I think overall it's just really important to see again that FloodNet is one project that is addressing flooding in the city on a spectrum of other projects. So the city is really doing its due diligence and trying to tackle this in multiple ways, where we know that to some extent our infrastructure is not responding well to flooding as it's happening. And we're seeing more of that going on. So I think there's a lot there to unpack, especially considering the fact that flooding is impacting neighborhoods across the city very differently, including in the Bronx. And so, as far as the city is concerned, it's really important that residents and other stakeholders are also equally informed to be able to speak back to the city about their experiences and what they know.
Now, I also wanted to talk about just like some of the work that you hope to do in the Bronx. I know we got to speak previously,
Right.
and you talked about like Longwood, an area in the Bronx, could possibly be an area for outreach. Could you just talk about outreach efforts and your goals for that?
Yeah, that's something I can definitely speak to. Right now, we have sensors that are installed in Soundview and the Foxhurst area. We're looking right now, I can say specifically in the Longwood area to build connections and contacts, but that's non-specific, right? I think across the Bronx, what we want to ensure is that our community engagement efforts are touching the outreach part, which I think is just like the tip of the iceberg as far as getting people to know who we are and what we're doing and being able to suggest to us where we should be looking and who else we should know in the city. But then there's the other component of community education, right? How do we share our knowledge? How do we share our resources and teach folks about how to use this dashboard, right? It's one thing to know the sensors is putting information there, but what do you do with it afterward? And then there's some part of it, which I alluded to as well, where folks can kind of be mobilized to take photos of what they're seeing and so long as it's safe, of course, and share that with statewide tools like MyCoast.
And I think this is amazing also because I think it encourages people in their community to be a little bit more involved,
Mhm.
about like what's happening in their area as opposed to just like only looking at the news. Obviously, that's important to be
Right.
informed, but I think this is a cool way to like get community members to be involved. So I think that's amazing. Can you just quickly let us know like just the importance of just kind of building that relationship as well?
Yeah, I think building it and maintaining it are equally important. And what we should know, especially for those of us that are New Yorkers, is that there is nothing like a community network, right? There is nothing like being able to share information with your neighborhoods. I think that we might also learn a lot of what's happening in the world just based off of that. And that's something that we want to leverage as far as community engagement goes for FloodNet, is really ensuring that folks know who we are and are able to facilitate a trust building, not just for folks to us, but also, us to the community as well.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back with more Open right after this.